Welcome, everyone, to Catholic Sunday Scriptures in Context. This is a ministry of the Augustinian Order, as well as both St. Paul and St. Augustine parishes. Today, we are focusing on the 33rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. Our first reading comes from the book of Daniel. So the last two chapters of this book, chapters 11 and 12, are not part of the Hebrew Scriptures because they were originally written in Greek and added much later. Some of the center parts, which were written in Hebrew, were some of the first scriptures translated into Aramaic, which was a replacement language for Hebrew, and was the language that Jesus spoke. And the first couple chapters also seem to have been written in Aramaic first. So it's a kind of a hodgepodge book. The story that we're focusing on really addresses the difficulty not from the Babylonian period, which it pretends to be from, which was from 612 to 537 BC, but of the Seleucid period from 330 to 165. You may have heard of the story of the Maccabees. Well, this would be that same kind of time. And these are the stories that are always recalled during the time of persecution for the Jewish people. They would recall how they were sent to Babylon and they survived nonetheless. And so even these difficulties are going to be survived. And in this telling, after the battles between the north and the south, Michael will arise. Michael is one who looks like God or seems like God in the image of God, right? And as we mentioned before in other things, they talked about angels rather than talk about God because they could not pronounce God's name. And this is the earliest text displaying belief in the resurrection. And this is resurrection of the good and the bad, where there would be judgment. There may not be justice in this world, but there will be in the next. That was to give the people courage to fight on for what they believe, because there is life in the next world. So there shall arise Michael, the great prince. And so you can see here, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. They shall live forever. And those who lead the many to justice shall be like stars forever. This is, again, and this, as we mentioned last week, was going to separate the Pharisees from the Sadducees. The Pharisees believed in resurrection, the Sadducees did not. Our second reading, continuation, the letter to the Hebrews, and the message here is that the invisible is the true reality. That which happens in heaven, not what happens on earth. The visible world is flawed and declining, but the sacrifice of Jesus is a new reality available to us, which is in the next world. The author is giving encouragement to those who are experiencing persecution, which is, at the time this book was written, or it was quite intense. But this one offered one sacrifice for sins, and he took a seat forever at the right hand of God. Where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer offering for sin. Offering for sin took place in this world, but the sacrifice of Jesus takes us to the next world. And lastly, the Gospel of Mark. So this is a sort of end times kind of writing. Apocalyptic literature was rather common at the time. The book of Revelation, which is going to be written much after Mark's Gospel, is that classic reference to it where there are lots of signs and symbols, and Jesus is going to start referring to that. So the reference here may be to the Roman assault on the city of Jerusalem. And you can see in these writings a concentration of things that Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel said. Mark is making a reference to them. And we know the Gospel of Mark was written in Rome when the persecutions of the Christians had started. Mark, we believe, was Peter's secretary, and much of the Gospel has the stories of Peter. And Mark now knows during this time of persecution that this message of the end times is important. The image of the fig tree is to offer hope. In the winter it looks like it's almost dead, but with the light and bright it comes to life. So here the bottom paragraph there, learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near in the same way. When you see these things happening, know that he is near at the gates. pray for peace. And if you think this is helpful to someone, please pass it on. Thank you very much.